All right. Um, Good morning, good day to anyone who's joining me. Um, this is another, again, a little bit of an experiment for me. I am trying a few things with the attempt to learn. And one area is hackathons. Especially through the month of October, there's some really good hackathons out there. I've decided to give some of them a try and just see what I can come up with. Not spending a whole lot of time, but just a little bit of experimentation with the attempt to learning new tools, maybe make a few friends along the way. One of the ones I will point out, if you have not done a hackathon, I've been on both ends as a participant as well as a sponsor of other hackathons. And sometimes people confuse the goal of a hackathon, both as a participant and as a sponsor. I think it's a really great opportunity for people to learn as a participant. Sometimes you create new opportunities. Hey, maybe you create something so valuable you want to go off and make that a side business or not. But generally, I think it's a good opportunity to also just build out a little portfolio, get a little more experience. And for me, a lot of times, if I'm trying to learn a particular new library or new technology, it gives me a little bit of a constrained time box project to go work on. And like even this example with Nihilist and AI, my objectives may not have anything to do. My objective as a participant may have nothing to do with Nihilist or AI per se, but maybe I just needed a project to work on because I'm trying to ramp up on um, Tailwind or something like that, or I want to go off and try a new UI component library and see, or maybe I want to go and I haven't built a Vue.js app in a while and I want to try the newest thing. That is the spirit of a hackathon. So a couple of things about this hackathon in particular that I was participating in. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Let's go all the way big. Nah, we'll go this way. Tell you a little bit about it. It's been running for a little while. I only found it very recently, and I just signed up for Nihilus on Friday just to give it a try. And the deadline's today. So I just want to share a little bit more about this one and how I think about hackathons. This one, of course, it's very important to go through and get sort of your bearings. So how I approached this one, I did sign up. I'm actually not logged into my account, but there are prizes. There are direct, who the judges are and some of the criteria for judging. But the spirit of this one, there is also a list of things that have to be submitted and you have to follow the official rules. So sometimes it's worth giving a skim over these rules. There's nothing surprising about this one. It's like a lot of other hackathons as well. But the key requirements is some application using a Nihilist SDK, as well as an AI tool. There is, of course, lots of excitement around AI tools. And so that is the spirit of this hackathon. It looks like there's 664 participants. I guess maybe I should log in here, but many have not formed teams. There was a few folks that came in as teams. I at least in just the last couple of days, since I was joining very late, I didn't go about creating a team. That's maybe why I'm sharing live here. Is hey, maybe next time you want to be on a team with me. There are some resources that they did. They did a number of live streams. Some of them were really, really good and really well done. They provided support. There is a Discord available for any questions. And I think that is one thing I've learned after doing a few hackathons is it's really important to take advantage of that. Usually you don't have the luxury of time to go figure it out on your own. Generally, that's a good convention in any position, right? Is if you're not following something, go ahead and ask. If you spend more than 30 minutes or whatever time limit you want to approach. The project gallery will start populating as things get submitted, and there's some discussions as well. It looks like a few people are asking for extensions. So there might be a few late coming in after the official deadline closes. So I'm going to go into I also actually I thought this was kind of clever. They did add a dev post hackathon project idea generator. Sometimes it's really good to have a cross-functional team, someone who's technical, someone who maybe has a little bit more of a product or marketing sense to tell a compelling story. And with that in mind, I'm going to take a few moments to share what I created. So um, I came up with my own idea. I did submit the project idea generator, and the thing that I came up with was the fact that I have seen quite a few uh, email threads that kind of go a little bit out of control. A lot of people reply back and forth, and there's almost I have this anxiety around some of these email threads sometimes of like, oh, if I don't chime in fast, it'll go off the rails, or people will start asking questions, especially if there's a lot of people on any particular thread. And then there are these cases where maybe I'm in another meeting or I've decided to take a day off or it's the weekend and you come back and find a 30 message email thread that's just going crazy. And now you have to decide, hey, was there anything relevant here? Can I read just the last message? But if I read the last message, I don't have context of anything else that was discussed. And it kind of gets a mess. And 30 messages, suddenly it becomes a lot of reading, especially since each one might be quoting a previous message, depending on which email reader, whether it's all collapsed nicely, or if someone's dropping images or something, it could really create a little bit of a nightmare to read through. So that was the spirit of what I created. So I'm logged in. So really, this is about long threads that I didn't read, and trying to get a text summarization of that thread. So if there are individual messages, it's not really a thread, so that you don't need this. But as the threads get larger, that can be very valuable to get a little bit of a summary. So what you're seeing here is a React application front end, Node.js on the back end. I'd actually considered a couple of alternatives here as well, and I think there's a spirit of this is a prototype or proof of concept. It's the first one I'm getting out there. Because it is built on the quick start guide that Nihilus has provided. Spruce in a little bit of coffee, and this is what I came up with. And I think that's a good strategy for hackathons. Get the first prototype out and ready. If you have larger objectives, continue, of course, up until the deadline. I don't know that I'll have much more time today. It's coming up on 9 a.m., so I might have a few other things to take care of. But if I had more time before the deadline, I can continue iterating and come up with something better or actually achieve some of those other objectives. So, by the time I submit this, their interface might be completely different. But for getting up and running, using a quick start guide or something that has been provided by the hackathon will just accelerate your time to delivery, of course. So what you're seeing here is email from a test email box I created. I also created some noise. When you select a particular message, you can see the message off on the right. And of course, you can reply and do a few things. But here's the example of a thread. This thread involves a number of participants, but there are 8 messages total. And so what I've actually done is added a button right here to summarize this 8-message thread. So when I click the message, it's going to actually try to generate a summary. And so it comes back with a text summarization. Funny story about this. I worked on a text summarization project when I was doing my undergrad. I had a part-time job at the Language Technologies Institute, and it was a text summarization project. And you could maybe tell from my beard, but that was actually 1997. So some of the concepts around AI, and I did take an AI class as an undergrad back in the late 90s. So AI has been around, but certainly some of the APIs that are out there that are making it much more accessible, that you don't have to spin up a lot of cloud resources, makes it really convenient. So this thread is summarized in just a few sentences. It's pulled out an important detail like the deadline. It talks a little bit about the requirements as well. And I think that's actually a pretty decent summary of the back and forth I had with myself. I've also included some summarization statistics here, such as the word count. This could be useful for calculating things like read time. Like how long would it have taken me to read 8 or 30 messages in a thread, where maybe this 2-line summary gives me enough, or if the summary is not quite enough, now I can also evaluate how much farther to go. Also, the fact that it was 8 messages and 3 participants, that gives me a sense of what level of churn is happening from the start to the end of a thread, that period of time, right? So if I was out for an afternoon or a day, it might be useful to know that over a 4-hour period, or a little over 4 hours, was when this occurred and generated about 2 emails per hour. I think sometimes about email and productivity in terms of what my ingoing and outgoing rate might be. I used to have inbox zero all the time where I responded to everything. Over time, as I got more and more emails, I realized that there's just no way to keep up, that my rate of being able to read can't keep up with the number of incoming in some cases. I also included a statistic around when this thread was last active. Maybe should you have a better label, but basically that it's been more than a day since any message came through this thread. So there's probably a good chance this thread is done, or it's waiting for someone to take an action. And I think the summarization did come out nicely in pointing out and highlighting that interaction. So how does this work? So I mentioned I am using Nihilus email calendar APIs, which works wonderfully as providing a REST API interface on top of otherwise your email inbox. So that gives you just a little bit more ease with scripting out solutions. There is some documentation around the email overview as well as the API. There were a few things I looked at in terms of the schema for this API. One was that there is snippets that are done. As far as I can tell, these are just the first 191 characters, and you cannot necessarily make changes to this. The API does support metadata though. So when doing a thread summarization as a first class object, I can also store the summary so that it's always available to anyone. If I were architecting a much more larger system, I can make that available to anyone on the thread, as opposed to each person needing to hit the server and do a summarization action. So that's a little bit about Nihilus. And on the summarization side, using the Hugging Face inference API, there is a summarization method. It takes a few parameters, and I used the a BART training model. A little bit about BART. It is text to text. There is actually a version of this that will try to do it in one sentence. So you can kind of tweak how long of a response you want in terms of the text summary. But generally speaking, there's a lot of details about how it actually goes through in building this model. And so this is I use the Facebook BART large CNN was actually the underlying model I used in my text summarization task as well. And I thought about taking this a little bit further. So back when I mentioned the fact that it's a React backend, or a React front end as well as Node backend, I had actually ran with the Python backend for a little bit. I was doing some experiments with sentiment analysis and other types of NLP tasks. And some of that's just other projects I've worked on, and felt like I might have a little bit more power if I had Python on the server side if I was doing a lot of these calculations. Some of the summarization, or summary statistics, let's call it that, of a thread that I talked about, some of those are just done client side because in this application, some of those details are available and it's not really an expensive operation. But the text summarization and talking to the Hugging Face interface is done on the back end, also just to keep the keys secret and everything. So anyways, that is the project in a nutshell. If you encounter a long thread, provide a button that says, hey, I don't have time to read this, just give me a quick summary. And then maybe you make a decision whether to actually go through and actually read all of the individual messages and come out at the end. There's a little bit more that could be done around this thread summarization task as well. Identifying what questions were asked, it, as well as what action items. Like I said, this did a pretty good job at actually getting to the highlight of the thread, or what the conclusion was, as it turns out. But more complex or longer threads might have multiple conclusions to be drawn. So I think much more test data will be necessary. And I'd say, that is a limitation in any hackathon project, is potentially coming up with enough test data to actually interface it. Here I used Gmail and set up some email aliases so that I could email myself and just create a simulation of a thread, having some sample data just to prove exactly how this would work. So that is the project. This is, like I said, version 1 of what I might submit. Depending on whether I go and take it to the next level with the other project. Like I said, was doing a little bit more of the sentiment analysis side of things and doing a few other elements. In terms of a few UI things, I'll also add, it's, longer threads have the summarization text, shorter ones do not, just because that doesn't make sense. Some of this interface can be customized, changing colors, changing style and everything. So, to that point, I tweaked it a little bit to get to this point of just having a nice little yellow, highlight area of the thread summary. So let's see. I don't know if anyone's joined me today. Probably not, and that's okay. But that is what I've been doing with the hackathon. So it is Hacktober as well that we've kicked off. I think there are a few more really great hackathons on DevPost probably going to be participating in, mostly just to learn some of the technology behind some of them. And some of them have prizes, and if I get a prize, great. If maybe I'll do something kind with that, and take someone out for lunch and help some folks out. That seems like a really good way to use any winnings. And it is also a good opportunity to submit to open source projects. So as a side effect of participating in a few of these hackathons this month, there may be underlying projects that I depend on, and maybe it's a good opportunity to take some winnings and support some of those folks who are contributing to open source as well. So I'll probably chime in, one day a week just to share what hackathons participating, what building, and if there is interest, I can crack open the code editor and show a little bit behind the scenes about how these are working. I probably won't be doing any live coding, but hey, why not? Maybe we can do that if I have a big block of time and I want to share and narrate kind of as I'm thinking through some of the problems, especially during the ideation phase. Having other folks to bounce ideas around could be very valuable. So that's it. A very quick session today. And hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to do one more quick run through of this project just to describe it. Because I am supposed to submit a short video. So this was a little bit of that test run. So I'm going to do it one more time. All right, hello. My name is Jason. This is the project I created. As you can see, more or less, I took the Nihilus Quick Start, added a little bit of coffee and a little bit of grit, created a sample email account to go back and forth. And the problem I was really trying to solve was, what do you do when you've stepped away from your computer, or you've taken a day off or the weekend, and someone goes nuts with a really long thread that they decide to have over the weekend? And now you have to decide, how do I want to get caught up? So to solve for that, if you have an email application like this, you might have some simple Q&A and going back and forth on individual messages. But for these threads, there is a button to summarize the entire thread. And so by clicking that, I get a summary. So this is using an AI tool to come up with a text summarization, and I'll go into that in a moment, but also presenting a little bit of analytics around the thread itself. The idea being, okay, this was an 8-message thread. I could go read all those messages and replies and sort of sift through it myself, but there were 265 words, 8 messages with 3 participants. Longer threads would be much more extreme. I could probably calculate exactly how long it would take me to read that number of words, or how many pages sometimes, especially if all of the email responses are very lengthy. Some people are very brief, others might ramble on a little bit. I also see the start to the end of this thread. The fact that this thread occurred over a 4 hour or so window with 2 messages per hour is actually not too extreme. Some threads I've been on might be just 1 hour with like 30 messages. Some message threads might be, an entire week. So wanted to get a sense of that duration, but also when was this last active? The label here, maybe I'll fix that and say that, was this last active? And it's been more than a day since the last message. And I think that gives a couple of things. One, I've got a summarization of what this whole thread was about. And I think this model did a pretty good job, because I was looking at how to store metadata as well as the snippets of the underlying API, whether these thread summaries could actually be stored with the objects themselves, as opposed to calculated on the fly, especially since there's multiple people on this thread, right? We know there's 3 participants and they all might want to see the summary at the end, or it might be forwarded to someone else. So having that thread summary go along for the ride could be very valuable. But I can also make an assessment like, hey, this was a quick thread or a long thread. It's been dormant for a while. Maybe it's not necessary to really go in here. So underlying this, of course, use the Nihilus API. There are snippets as well as the full body and extracting the HTML from that body. I looked at the metadata in terms of the ability to store data along with an email message or thread. There are some limits on that. So this text summarization, if it gets too long, if it's more than 500 characters, that becomes a problem. So keeping the thread summary, but I mean, that also creates a situation where maybe that's too much you want to read. So underlying this, what the integration with the Nihilus APIs is with Hugging Face, the inference API. There is a summarization, and I've worked in text summarization projects for quite some time. First project was at the Language Technologies Institute back in 1997. So certainly the tools have advanced quite a bit and do a much better job. The underlying model for this is BART. Specifically, I use the Facebook BART large CNN model. There is a variation of this I had considered and tried out a little bit as well, which generates just a single sentence. For summarizing a thread, especially a complex work-related thread, limiting it or boiling it down to one sentence may not be appropriate, but maybe that's a widget or something that could give end user control. Maybe the executive only wants the single sentence, but someone else on the team who actually has a vested interest needs a little bit more substance to it. And of course, the way this is built is that if someone wanted to go through and read, of course, they can still read the entire thread, just knowing that, there's a lot of back and forth. And based on the summary, they may decide whether it's worth their time and energy to actually go through it all. So that is my project for this hackathon, continuing to iterate on up until the deadline. So it might actually have a different user interface, as well as a few other things under consideration, such as sentiment analysis. Looked at using, this was built with the React front end and Node back end. Also had considered the Python back end for some work I've done with NLTK and sentiment analysis. Whether or not that's considered a modern AI API or not is maybe up for debate. But knowing the sentiment of this thread or of the participants, if one person's very negative and 2 people are very positive, that can also be very insightful for understanding a thread. So thank you very much. And that's it for today. All right, so signing off. Hopefully you found some part of this interesting and or useful. So going to end the stream. Have a great day.